Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful start to your weekend today. And joining me is Micah Current. Micah, how did you do last week? I feel like when I talk to people, it's either with the time change on Sunday, the election on Tuesday, and I feel like people have just been exhausted from just the time change. Even though we gained an hour of sleep, I think just it's getting dark earlier, just throwing a lot of people off. And then depending on how the election results turned out, whether federal or even just, I know in just Columbus alone, there's a lot of school levies that failed. So there's been a lot of feelings about that as well. So, how was your week, man?
Um, it was interesting to say the least. I think you're right about the point of people being exhausted, and I think that was even before the election happened. In respect to the time change, and this year's just this time of year for folks is just kind of rough. Just because, like you said, it gets darker earlier, and you know we go from it getting dark at like 9 p.m. to getting dark at 5 p.m. So it's like a drastic change for folks. Um, and I've shared before on this podcast that I I struggle with some mental health stuff and anxiety being the specific culprit there, but been doing a lot better on my meds and things like that. But like with this time change and long days at work, you get home and you're just exhausted. Like I just want to lay down and not do anything. But I know I have to work out. I have to take care of the baby. I have to make sure my wife's doing okay. I have to cook dinner and all these things. And it just seems like there's my wife kept saying last week, there's not enough hours in the day.
Ain't that the truth? Yeah. Oh,
And I know we're going to talk a little bit about it today with the election stuff from last week, but like our I think I shared about on Stories Gone Wild last week about how long the line was to go vote early on the Sunday before election day. Um, our voting place is the middle school here in town, and they open at 6:30, I think it is. And so we got up at 5 and we were in line by 6, and we probably were 30 or 40 back from the front. And we got in, we were able to vote pretty quickly. And by the time we came out, there was a line wrapped around the building. So I was glad that we went when we did. However, then we had to go to work for 8 hours and then come home and, stay awake, try to stay awake for the election coverage. And I was watching it and I fell asleep and I rolled around about 4 a.m. and I saw that Trump had won the election, and um, that this big red wave that they talked about in 22 pretty much happened this year. So
mm,
um,
yeah.
the wild experience. I know we're going to get more into detail of that today, but
Hmm.
yeah, that's. But you're right. Last week was just exhausting for everybody, regardless of whether you're a conservative or not, or a progressive, whatever you want to call it, Democrat, Republican.
Hmm.
It's just a long week, and with the time change, and we're getting ready to dive into the holidays, so that's the next thing. So here we are.
Yeah. And I'm debating because we have our family. We usually have like our family church small group, parent small group. And usually I always have like a video and we kind of talk a little bit about intentional parenting and certain things. And I'm almost positive we need to talk about, how to deal with how to deal with family during the holidays. Because I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes when you're with family during the holidays, sometimes things can get brought up that you don't really want to talk about or share, and it kind of creates conflict. And I think sometimes politics and religion and are kind of the big ones, but I think even ideas about the school, a lot of school levies failed. And especially if you have local families, and let's say you have maybe family members who voted against the school levy because they didn't want the raise on their property tax because they're on fixed income, that kind of, that might be a point of contention for some people. But no, yeah, it's I think it's just with the time change, the election, and now we're going into the holiday season, it's just going to be a very exhausting, anxious time for a lot of people for a variety of different reasons. Um, but before we start getting into the election, stories gone wild. I have one, Micah, and you are probably, I don't think I've ever shared this one with you because it happened this past week. So I get a phone call from the preschool director Wednesday saying they called the police because somebody drove into the church parking lot, got out with a roll of toilet paper, and went and pooped in the front lawn of the church, wiped, and got in the car and drove away.
I don't even need to share anything.
I
We don't
mean,
even need to record a podcast. We can just stop it now.
oh my, I mean, but the funny thing is like, the preschool thought maybe it was a squatter who was kind of like, because we have like a couple of like areas, the way the church is built, there's one specific area where it's like two columns that are close together that someone can easily slide through and they won't be seen, but they kind of have like a place that blocks them from the wind and from the elements. And we've actually found like sleeping bags and coats in there. Um, so it's almost like, wow, like, they thought it was that, but the pastor's like, I mean, we're kind of, the police came and I guess they took a sample. I don't know what they did, but
Did you see it?
no, because I was getting dressed. I was out of the shower getting dressed, and my kids were already at school,
So you missed
and
it.
so I missed it. I didn't get to witness the glory of it. But how they knew about it is the person, my neighbor who lives across the alley from me, she had she was cooking breakfast. She looked out her window, which looks right into the church parking lot, and saw the whole thing unfold. So she called the Carrie, our preschool director, goes, call the police right now. Someone's pooping in the churchyard. But I mean, they did that, they investigated it, and from kind of what they were told in the description and everything, the police don't think that it was just like a homeless person or somebody who may have been mentally distressed or anything because it doesn't fit the mo. Someone thinks that it may have been somebody who was mad at the way the election turned out and decided to kind of take their revenge or kind of take an act of defiance by pooping in the front lawn of a UMC church because apparently method UMC, who just had a split over LGBTQ issues, would probably vote red in the election. So it doesn't make sense. Like none of this makes sense, but that's the theory that the police had. I'm like, well, that's a weird way to jump to that remark. So I don't know, Micah. It's I don't think in all the years of ministry, the only pooping incident I've had in ministry would have been at Marengo when a kid pooped in the pool. That was the extent of ministry and pooping. And now I have people pooping in the front yard of the church in my 40s. Like, what's going on?
So what you're saying is that you had a Caddyshack incident at Marengo.
We did. Actually, I want to know because I always joke that it's this one specific kid that did it, and he always says it wasn't him. And I keep joking about it every time. And even when it's his birthday,
Oh, wait a
he's
minute.
like,
It had multiple times.
oh, 1 week in 1 week, it happened multiple times to the point that we shut down the pool for 2 days, and the kids were upset because they couldn't swim in the pool because it's like we kept spiking it, and eventually got to the point where you know the
The
chlorine level
chemicals
is
are
going to
too
be so
much.
the chemicals are too high, it's going to like hurt kids. So, but yeah, oh, but that's another funny story about the pooping in the pool incident. But yeah,
We should do like an episode about Camp Moringa stories.
I did one years ago. It's in the archives.
Yeah, but you didn't do one with me.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I went to Moringa for years as a kid, and
Mm.
share about how John Trussell made me hug a tree.
Oh yes, the tree hugging. I can remember the time when the guy was, I had a counselor. It was like my first year at camp, and there was a counselor who was talking about spiritual warfare, and then he started talking about playing with an Ouija board in the woods. The next day he went home. He was sent home. Camp
I don't, I
stories.
don't, I don't think I can top the stories on Wild this week with the pooping in the Bexley United Methodist Church. Well, in the front yard, rather.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Well, with that being said,
Yeah, I got nothing.
so today we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the aftermath of the election. I know it's, I think we said it last week, Micah, when we kept talking about the, as we were approaching the election, it seemed like people were probably more nervous about this election than they were about the one in 2020.
Funny enough, I felt the opposite.
And see, I felt the opposite too. I didn't feel that way, but I know a lot of, and I don't know if that's a lot of people like people post on the media or that's just what the messaging I kept hearing through all the political ads and news
Well,
outlets. Like,
you got to think though, 4 years ago, there was a pandemic going on. There were people
mhm.
riding of a racehorse, and they were literally burning cities down in like Minneapolis and Atlanta, and some other places, Portland, Oregon, and other places. There were some very intense things going on in our country in respect to race and the pandemic, and people having opinions about the pandemic, and um, said pandemic a lot, but like just there was so many opinions being shared, and then um, I don't know if it was aside from maybe 2000 when Bush and Gore ran, we didn't know who won the election the next morning when we woke up. And I remember waking up
Oh
in
yeah.
2020 and it was just like, what? Like nobody knows. Like regardless if Biden won, you know what I mean? Like if Biden would, was going to win, like I fine, but like I don't remember as a child or even in my adult life as someone who's been able to vote um to wake up the next morning after an election and not have a result.
Yeah.
And right now, there's even, I think, I was going to look, but like, I think that there's even, um, we still don't have the Senate, or not the Senate, the House completely. Right now, it's 214 to 203, and you need 218 for the majority. So there are still 4 seats that are unaccounted for. And we're almost a week out from the election. But the
Yeah.
Senate's done and the president's done. You know what I mean? Like it's, but um, yeah, I didn't feel hardly, I didn't feel anxious at all about this one compared to 2020. I think that, and I don't know how much you want to get into the actual meat of the election itself, but like I think that there's a lot of there was talk in 2022 of this big conservative red wave because of how the country felt, about Biden administration and Democrats controlling the country,
Hmm.
and it turns out there wasn't a red wave. It was literally we just or the not we, not you and me, but Republicans took the House, but they didn't take the Senate. And
Hmm.
so um, this time around, 24, it looks like it's going to be a clean sweep, right? You got President Trump won, and um, Republicans took the Senate, and it looks like they're going to take the House. But back to your original premise, I didn't feel anxious at all in respect to, and I still don't. Um, but there were folks that I work with who are very progressive in their beliefs, and they acted. There was a very somber tone when I
Hmm.
went to work on Wednesday. Um, People were upset,
Yeah. When I went to work on Wednesday, it was business as usual. Like, and I think, you know, as much as a lot of people say have their opinion about the UMC in general, about their beliefs and everything else. Um, the one thing I will say about the UMC is, or especially the one I'm attending, is we have a variety of people who vote different. To vote different ways. I'm sure there's some people in the church who definitely voted for Kamala Harris. I'm sure there's a bunch of other people who voted for Donald Trump, and I'm sure there's probably a few people who probably voted third party. For all the third parties who didn't withdraw, like at the last minute, um, I kept
which
seeing
is funny
signs.
because when we went to go vote on Tuesday, like there were some third party candidates that I had never heard of.
Oh yeah.
Like, I mean, I had heard, obviously I've heard of Robert Kennedy Jr., but like I had never heard. There
Oh,
were
was
like
he on
two
the
or
ballot?
three.
Was he on the ballot in your jurisdiction?
No, he wasn't.
Okay, because I know for some people who voted early, he was still on the ballot. And I mean, I kept seeing, and then when I walked into my polling place, there was a sign that said, "Hey, any vote if you're planning on voting for these people, don't because your vote's not going to count because they've withdrawn as of," and they had put the date on when they withdrawn. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I've never seen that happen before. Um, but yeah, but when I went to work, like even our pastor, who I would say would vote Democrat, just by her views and everything else. She came in, she worked the polls Tuesday in her community and was out till like 9 a.m. because she was the one who had to like deliver all the ballots to the warehouse where they collect all of them and scan all of them for them to pitch the results. And it was like she just kind of was like talking and joking around, like she wasn't coming in going like, oh my gosh, what the heck happened? Like she was fine because I mean she even said like, hey, at the end of the day, no matter who you vote for, Jesus still sits on the throne. God is still in control. And we don't have to be anxious about the election because we know that there's a heavenly king, a heavenly father that loves us and takes care of us. And that was it. And and so for me, it was business as usual. Now, on the internet, however, I think I was seeing a lot of people who had a lot of anger, a lot of people who were very confused. I think probably the most stuff I kept seeing is did how did an entire country vote a felon in as president? I've seen a lot of posts like that. I've seen a lot of posts basically kind of highlighting all of Trump's allegations and even shortcomings and saying, how did this person become our president? I've seen even a lot of people, but then I've seen a lot of people, even people from the Democratic side, basically saying, I don't blame people for voting for Trump because the Democrats have not been doing a good job of making sure that we felt seen or heard. And we just feel like nothing's happened. But I think the main thing that really bothered me was just a lot of the religious undertones or maybe overtones with the election. People posting, you know, this is God's will. But even the one thing that I thought was really weird, this was a guy from Virginia who went to like a Glenn Youngkin rally who was there. And he said, if Trump wins, then I know it's God's will that Trump's elected. If Kamala Harris wins, I'm at peace because that means that the second coming of Christ is coming soon. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, what, wait a minute, what? So, but I feel like sometimes when people start adding religion into politics, you get a lot of these sort of messages, which, if you're somebody who had a deep conviction on why someone shouldn't be president because of cases of maybe their morality or their integrity, and then you have someone who represents Christianity saying, this is God's will, I feel like that message kind of conflicts for a lot of people, which probably led to that person being disgruntled and pooping in the front yard of our church last week. Like, I don't know, Micah. Like, it's, yeah, it's, I don't know. Like, I feel like I can understand people being upset and people being happy about the election, but I feel like anytime when someone starts putting religion in there or start making comparisons to biblical figures or start doing all these type of things, it's something that really bothers me. And so I just don't know what your reaction was. Like, have you been seeing a lot of people posting stuff kind of comparing, kind of connecting the election to some type of spiritual movement or making comparisons to biblical characters or anything like that?
Not as much as I've seen people be like, you know, I don't want to say rude, but like very vocal. I think vocal is the word I want to use. Vocal about their opinion because President Trump won the election. Like people that
Mm-hmm.
maybe have a different viewpoint than I do, or you do, or whoever. But I haven't seen a lot of um, pastors, leaders of churches, things like that. A lot of what I've seen is similar to what your pastor said in respect to like, yeah, Trump may have won, but Jesus is still King and Lord, and that's all that matters. Um, I hope he gets in there and does a good job, and that he learned a lot from his first term, and maybe he'll surprise a lot of people. That's my hope. Um, and there is. I was watching this video the other day, but like there's this somber tone, I think, to Donald Trump now. Not saying like he's a perfect angel or anything, but like
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a little bit of like I don't want to say redemption, but there's a lot of like, you know, he's more calm now, I think, than when he was in 16. And I
Hmm.
think that, I think that yes, he's strong in his beliefs and strong willed, but at the same time, I don't think that he is um I don't know what I'm trying to say. It seems like he's a little bit more even keeled this time. Like he's not like as aggressive in respect to like poking fun at people and uh you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Do do you think the I don't know, do you think that changed probably because of the 4 years he wasn't president, or do you think that was like more of a recent thing when he had that assassination attempt that you kind of saw that demeanor change?
Probably both.
Hmm.
I mean, probably a combination of both. But I think too, like I saw another video comparison the other day where it was like, you know, maybe it was good that he lost in 20 and it gave him more to think about. And this time around, he's gonna do things differently in respect to like unifying the country,
Hmm.
or at least trying
Well,
to.
and I
Granted, you're not
think,
going to make everybody happy because,
oh
like,
no.
bottom line, and I've said this numerous times on your show, I tend to lean more conservatively.
Hmm.
But I woke up on, in 2020 when Biden won the election, and I didn't like stay in bed and cry. I didn't, I went to work. I did, like it. There have been times in my life where the candidate that I didn't want to win won, and it wasn't the end of the world for me. Same thing with sports teams. Like, like if my favorite sports team lost, sorry. I mean, there's always next week or there's next year.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, a friend of mine at work came up to me and he's a fairly progressive person. And he asked me, um, he came up to me, he's like, I just don't get it. Why did the country vote the way they did? And I'm like, honestly, I can't completely answer that for you because I'm not, I don't know everybody in this country that voted. Obviously, millions of people. But people were tired of paying more for groceries. People were tired of paying more for gas. People were tired of, struggling um, to provide for their families. And it's hard to turn on the news and see that the Senate or the president or the government passes these bills to spend billions of dollars to Ukraine and to Israel and the Middle East. And it's like, yes, we need to support our allies, but at the same time, there are people that are homeless and that are struggling in this country.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I think that, I mean, I know a lot of people say, well, I hope, like I've seen it like from a lot of like women saying, well, I hope cheaper groceries meant that you took away my rights or
Reproductive
whatnot,
rights.
my reproductive
Well,
rights. And
and and
well,
and
oh,
what
go
I'll
ahead.
say to that, what I'll say to that is that yes, the Roe versus Wade was overturned, but they did that while Biden was president. The Supreme Court overturned that while President Biden was president. Well, during his term, not while Trump was president. Well, Biden was president, and they pushed it back to the states for the states to decide. They didn't make abortion illegal, and that's like one of the number one arguments in this country is that they're making abortion illegal, and depends on the state that you live in. We live in Ohio. Last year, they passed an issue one, which for being such a conservative state, they made abortion legal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and even if you think about, and again, I don't know too much and you can correct me, but I believe, because again, like the Supreme Court is mostly conservative
Conservative majority.
judges,
It's six
and
to
of
three, I think, right now.
6-3. So they could have easily did a federal ban on abortion, and
Yeah,
there'd been nothing. But they decided, but the one thing about Republicans is they believe that, that the government shouldn't be the high all things on certain issues. They believe that it should be relegated to the states. So for me, them saying, hey, we're overturning Roe v. Wade and we're going to let the states decide, like, you let the states decide, you probably have more power to vote if abortion is going to be or illegal or legal, and you're going to have more influence and more say as a voter in a state election than you do in a federal election, because you don't have a choice. It's up to the Supreme Court justices. Now, you as a person can use your vote to be able to vote all that stuff in or out of power. Unless I'm wrong, unless I'm getting that confused.
no,
But
I think you're right on. But at the same time, too, like I think that the messaging that what we see in the news, regardless of your news cycle or whatever your social media is showing you, um, is that conservatives are anti-abortion with the exception of X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, progressives, Democrats are, it's the woman's choice. We're the woman's
mm-hmm,
choice. But like, I'm a very pro-life person, but at the same time, I also believe there are situations where you cannot control the outcome of what's going to happen, whether it's a disease that's going to kill the baby and the mother, or the mother and not the baby, and the baby and not the mother, and like it's vice versa. But like there are situations that are extreme that like if you don't terminate pregnancy or if you don't do something that's going to cost the baby's life or the mother's life or both.
mm-hmm, yeah. And
But
oh, go ahead.
there are states in this country that think that you can carry a baby to term and kill it, which is murder.
Mm-hmm,
So I don't know. It's a very controversial topic.
yeah. And it is. And I think And I think just kind of, the idea of when people ask, well, how did Trump win the election? From my point of view and from my observation, a lot of times I don't really feel like I got to learn much about policy at all during this election. When I watched when I watched the Biden and Trump debate, it just seemed like it was two people bickering back and forth. When I saw the Harris and Trump debate, I felt like I just saw two people bickering back and forth. I didn't really learn anything about what they were going to do, how they're going to fix things. It was mostly like, well, I'm going to do this because my opponent doesn't do this and blah, blah, blah. When I watched the vice presidential debate between Walz and Vance, that was probably the first time during this election where I felt like, okay, here's two people who, they kind of have little playful jabs with each other, but these are two people who really talked about the issues and what they wanted to try to do as vice president or the things that they were going to do to support the president. And I felt like that was probably the most, almost like a return to form to politics, when I was growing up as a kid or when I first started voting, where it was like you have two people who are debating issues. Occasionally they may make a little jab or whatnot, but they're talking about the issues. Whether you agreed with it or disagreed, at least you kind of knew where everyone stood. I felt like I didn't know anything, and the political ads didn't really help either. They didn't really give me much information. So, as a voter, not having that information, the only thing I can do is basically vote by association. So, if I'm looking at Trump and Harris, okay, Harris is connected to Biden, which right now these first 4 years is 4 years as president. We have seen high inflation. We have seen somebody in the office who apparently um, doesn't have very good cognitive skills, or at least that's what's being portrayed. Um, and they basically his own party kind of ousted him out to put Kamala Harris as vice president because they think that he's not fit to be the president, or they don't think he'd be strong enough to be able to beat Trump. And then you look at Trump's side and go, okay, yeah, you have all this chaos attached to him. But at the same time, you also had, hey, things are going well in the stock market. There's affordable gas prices. There's affordable food prices. People had money to be able to pay their bills. People, you know, even though there was a lot of that dark cloud over it, and I don't want to like just kind of dismiss that because I think that's very key too on why a lot of people are like, hey, you basically voted for this person because you want to be able to go back to having your $1.25 eggs. Um, but when you have nothing that's presenting issues to you and you're not able to be an informed voter and really be able to get issues and people can do the and I always hear people say, well, do the research. There's a lot of times where people just don't have time to sit and do online research and look at everything and try to sort through everything to figure out what do these candidates believe.
Which is funny because like I saw a video, Scott, that that this election was probably decided a lot based on like where the candidates where the candidates were seen. And what I mean by that was like people were like when Trump did the Joe Rogan podcast, he got 42 million views in a week. When
Well,
JD Vance did it, same deal. Like there was a high percentage of people that viewed that. And like I think the candidates understood that like if they wanted to be seen other than like in the mainstream media, they're gonna have to do things like Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn
and
and some other
that's
pod and go ahead.
yeah. No, and I'm thinking that's the point because if you're just watching the news, depending
Yeah,
on whatever you're
if you
watching,
just
you're not
watched
getting anything.
if you just watched the debate, because there was one debate between Trump and Biden, there was one debate between Trump and Harris, and then there was one debate between Vance and Walz. And if you didn't watch any of those, you wouldn't have known.
or
But the
e-
Trump, go
or
ahead.
even if you're just trying to watch just the regular news, or even if you're watching CNN, or even if you're watching Fox News, like these cable news things, which they have political pundits that cannot tell you about. They're not really telling you everything that this person stands. They're just a lot of times they're going like, yeah, vote for Trump because if you vote for Harris, this is what that means. It's almost like we're willing to tell about this is what our opponent stands for and everything they're going to do, which is awful, but we're not going to tell you what our candidate or our pick's going to do. So when you have something like the Joe Rogan podcast and you have Donald Trump or JD Vance, you not only get to know about the issues, but you also get to see them as a person, right? Because when you're being vilified, both Trump and Harris being vilified in your mainstream media, listening to a podcast on Joe Rogan or listen to any type of podcast where someone's there, you get a little bit more of what they stand for, what they believe, and who they are as a person, and not what's being portrayed, what the media wants you to portray this person as. And I think a lot of times that that kind of sends people, makes people, especially undecided voters, kind of go, okay, well, I know who I'm voting for because I know more about this president, even though I don't necessarily like everything he did, even though I think everything he did, I believe that he's the blame for the January 6th thing and he's the blame for this. And I believe all that. But yet I'm going to vote for him because at least I know a little bit more about who he is as a person and his character. And I really have no clue about this other person except that they're associated with an administration who has let me down.
Well, and two, like I read and well, I've seen numerous videos of Joe Rogan where he invited Kamala Harris to come on the show and she didn't do it. Same thing with Theo Vaughn. And
But she was on SNL, which really didn't help anything.
right.
Not, I mean, hey, I'm here, woo, and we get a good cheer reaction, but we don't know anything about in depth, and I would say anything in depth about her policies, what she wants to try to do, how she's going to fix some of the issues, how she's going to deal with the war happening in the Ukraine, the war in Israel, inflation, um, all these other issues that we have in this country and abroad. Like we don't really know, and I think that kind of set the undecided voter to vote for Trump, which is why I think a lot of people are just confused. Like, wait, what? Why did you vote? And
I
I think
honestly,
it.
as a conservative, I don't think the Democrats help themselves.
I mean, and as someone who middle of the road and independent, like, and just as middle of the road as you can get, I don't think so either. I mean, I would agree with you. Like, I don't think and you know what was interesting? And I mean, I've heard theories, and this is theories, and I don't know if you've heard this stuff too, but I feel like after the end of the election, when President Biden was talking and kind of giving like a address to the nation, I'm watching that thing, and that guy was precise and clear and communicative of everything he wanted to say to the American people. Probably more polished than anything else I've seen him talk and do things. Um, and then there's that thing where he put on the MAGA hat, and everyone like made a big deal about that. But then there was a picture of voting, and did you see the picture of Jill Biden when she went to go vote? How she was wearing a red power suit,
Yep.
and part of there's been some theories out there that because his own party ousted
Ousted him.
him, that he was like, I mean, he was like, okay, well, screw you, Democrats, and we're gonna. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't know if that's entirely true, but it makes a pretty good argument. It makes a pretty darn good argument. Now,
Well, too.
and that's
Well,
a
I also read too that like Biden had planned on being a one-term president, and he should have got out sooner and not waited until June. And they should have had an actual primary with Democrat candidates and opened the field for other Democrats to come in and run for president. And by him not doing that and then basically ousting him, it just presented chaos. And Kamala Harris didn't win any delegates. She didn't win any primary, and she had less than 100 days to the candidate for president. And um, the other thing that I heard was the whole topic of politics and how they just don't work in this country, whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's gender equality, whether it's um, XYZ. And that's all the Democrats wanted to run on. They didn't want to run on the economy. They didn't want to run on foreign wars. They didn't want to run on immigration. They just acted like it just was, yes, it's happening, but they didn't want to deal with it. And it's like, you're in power. Like,
yeah.
you're in power right now. You should deal with it. And like you said there, it's interesting how Biden, you know, he's very coherent that the day after the election.
Well, and the other thing I'm very curious about too is, I mean, I don't know how many school levies in your area were on the ballot, Micah.
I'm not sure. I think there were a couple at least, but I don't
Okay.
know that they passed.
Well, and that's the thing, like there's at least probably a good handful of school levies in Franklin, at least in the Columbus area. And I think out of the handful of them, only two passed, Bexley being one of them, which I was surprised because there was a lot of, in the community chat rooms, there's a lot of people who are like, we're not passing this. This is going to raise our property tax by a lot, like to the point where we might have to move because we would not be able to afford the property taxes on our homes because a lot of these historical homes are over $500,000. So, I mean, for them, it's like, oh, this 5 year levy's not going to be great. And, you know, in retrospect, I'm wondering because of just the high inflation and gas and food and everything being so high and people really feeling the financial pinch because of all this, everything being so expensive, just daily daily provisions that you need to survive. Like I'm almost curious if people who usually would vote for a school levy voted against it because of the way inflation has affected the average American family. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, because there's some schools that failed their levy, which a lot of these communities are great communities. They have great school systems, and historically, they always vote for the levy. And in this time, it was like, nope. And even in Bexley, even though it passed, it barely passed. It was like I think it was like 56 and 44, which is pretty close. It's not like 78 and 32. It was a very close race to um very close race as far as the school levy in Bexley, and it passed. And we'll see what happens because I think there's probably going to be a lot of people starting January that are going to move out of the area because they're not able to afford the property taxes to live in Bexley because of the school levy. So I don't know, but I think a lot of that might be just like your older folks who are on fixed income. Now they can't afford to live in their own home anymore because of the property tax value is going to go up. So yeah, I think overall it's just a it is. I think it's just a mess. I think a lot of times people are just kind of reeling, and think I think for a lot of people the only rest or peace or respite I can get can be just the same thing that you and I have been saying, things that we have seen our pastors have said, that hey, depending on how everything turns out, we have to remember that God is on the throne and he loves us and he'll take care of us and everything will be okay. If that's something that doesn't sit right with you or you still feel at ease, remember that you have rights. And again, even though we have a president, there's always going to be another Senate race. There's always going to be another House race. There's always going to be something coming up in 2 years. And you can now vote and influence things. And if the federal government decides we're going to just roll back some issues that are going to be state issues, guess what? You have more power to vote those issues into law or not, because your vote's now going to deeply affect how that's going to take place than if it's being controlled by the federal government. Because now it depends on, well, how is the person that I have elected to the federal government, how are they going to vote on this issue? Versus how am I going to vote on this issue? How is my community going to influence this thing? And again, if you're someone who's very passionate about this or you don't like it, then if you're not involved in politics, then get involved in politics. You fussing and getting upset and putting stuff on social media or making a video and putting it on TikTok of you having a meltdown is not going to change anything. Changing things means you vote, and changing things mean getting involved in the political process. And if that's something you want to do, then do it, and then see what difference you can make. I mean, that's the great thing. I think that's a great thing that we have as the United States of America versus any other country, is that the average person can decide to get involved in politics and can make big change. Any closing thoughts from you, Micah?
Other than my child's having a meltdown right now, that's fine.
I was wondering, I'm like, okay, he's very silent. I'm sure something's happening over on his end. Well, friends, first of all, thank you so much for listening to Scott Stedman Podcast. We really enjoy being on here and sharing these episodes with you. Again, let us know how you've reacted. Are you like me? Do you get upset when people start kind of throwing religion into political outcomes and kind of make these bold claims? Like for me, that bothers me. Does that bother you? I'd like to know. Maybe you're someone who's kind of an independent or someone who was an undecided voter. Maybe you voted a certain way and you want to kind of share your opinion on why you did. We love to hear it. You can send us an email at thescottstedman.com, or you can go ahead and put a comment in the comment section, and we'll read it on air and kind of discuss it on our next episode. So friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and we'll be back on with another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.